This is Professor Arvind Kumar Jha from School of Education, IGNOU, and I am going to talk today on the topic theoretical perspective of instruction. Friends, in this video, we are going to discuss some of the important points, for example, conceptual understanding of instruction and instructional process. While talking all these things and discussing all these points, this particular theme, I'll be concentrating myself on number one, behaviorist perspective, then cognitivist perspective and humanistic perspective, and most importantly, last but not the least, the constructivist perspective of instruction and their applications in instructional designing. Friends, as far as the theoretical understanding is concerned, I would like to start with some questions. And the very first question that is coming to my mind is, why do we need to have instructions? Why do we need to get instructions from anyone else? Why do I need to instruct someone else? If there is no provision of facilitating instructions at all, what consequence will be there in someone's life? Is instruction really important? Friends, we'll be able to answer these questions if we understand the concept and process of instruction well. So let us start our discussion with what is instruction. Instruction is an act that takes place between two individuals. So we can say that it is a human activity which takes place in a particular situation and a particular context. Therefore, we can restate this statement like this, that an instruction is a situational and contextual human act. So, and the purpose of instruction is to help and facilitate people learn. Now, if it really facilitates people to learn, then we'll have to understand what is learning. Learning is perceived as the process by which a relatively permanent change or modification in behavior takes place as a result of practice or as a result of experience. So learning is also perceived as change in cognitive development. From another perspective, learning is construction. So construction of knowledge on the basis of one's experiences. So learning is, from the behavioristic point of view, learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior, and it is the result of reinforced practice. Reinforced practice through the process of stimulus and response is the cause of learning which takes place between the reinforced practice and the relatively permanent change in behavior. Such a concept of learning assumes that certain conditions in the environment bring about fundamental changes in our behavior and that these changes persist for a long time. So learning is not directly observable but can be inferred from performance. So in this context, when we speak of a relatively permanent change in behavior, we refer to a change in performance. Now, on the other hand, the cognitivists say that learning is not only change in behavior, but also it is the changing or organization of cognitive structures, which involves an acquisition of knowledge and the transformation of new knowledge. In other words, we can say that learning is a change in one's knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values brought about through experience. And this change may or may not be expressed in overt behavior. For example, suppose a teacher is teaching in a class what is a set, and I don't know how to define it. Or my students don't know how to define it. Now, after the teaching is over, the same teacher asks me, what is a set? And I say, a set is a collection of well-defined objects. Now, this phenomena of defining a concept, which was not possible for me earlier, right? I don't think we can say this is a change in behavior. Actually, this change is cognitive change. This example is an example of cognitive change. There is another school of thought, which we people generally call constructivism. Constructivism refers to a process where the learner is actively constructing both the knowledge acquired or the knowledge constructed and the strategies used to acquire it. So the learner constructs a new version of reality from his or her own unique experiences, and it is this construction that he or she then uses to deal with any new experiences in the field. So constructivist learning is about the elaboration of the concepts through questioning, critical analysis, and application of the concept, and by reflection of an action. So to learn constructively is to actively process new information, use a structured experiential activity, and analyze life experiences, solve problems, examine critically one's existing mental level. Friends, it is believed that the effects of instruction on learning are often useful and easy to observe. So when instruction is designed to accomplish a particular goal of learning and designed based on specific content, actually it facilitates learning. So we can say that instruction may include events that may have a direct effect on the learning of human being. And it may be generated by a page of print, by a picture or a television program, or by a combination of any of the above. So the purpose of designed instruction is to activate and support the learning of the individual. I would like to quote here Driscoll. Driscoll has defined what instruction is all about. And Driscoll says, I quote, "Instruction is the deliberate arrangement of learning condition to promote the attainment of some intended goal." So there are different kinds of instructional events, friends. They may require the distance teachers or the instructional designers or ODL specialists participation to a greater or lesser degree, and they may be determined by the student to a greater or lesser degree. So these events constitute a set of communications with the student. The communications that make up instruction have the sole aim of aiding the process of learning. This we should not forget. You design the instruction the way you want to design, or from any perspective you design the instruction, you have all the freedom. But you should not forget that the ultimate purpose of designing an instruction is to facilitate learning. Well, friends, now I'll talk about learning and instruction, because today we are talking on theoretical perspective of instruction. So learning and instruction both are very, very important, and there is a need to understand what kind of correlation exists between these two concepts. In this context, I would like to quote Merrill. Merrill provides us 5 principles of instruction that support effective learning. What are those? Number 1, Merrill says that learning is promoted when learners are engaged in solving real-world problems. So very clearly, can we produce some material, SLM, or the video content, or any instructional design where the learners have this feeling that they are not solving artificial problem, rather they are solving real problem. Second, learning is promoted when existing knowledge is activated as a foundation for new knowledge. Third principle, according to Merrill, is learning is promoted when new knowledge is demonstrated to the learner. Learning is promoted when new knowledge is applied by the learner. This is the fourth principle. Fifth and the last principle is learning is promoted when new knowledge is integrated into the learner's world. So friends, I would like to say here is this, that instruction consists of a set of events external to the learner designed to support the internal process of learning. And that we have to remember, whatever we are doing as an ODL expert or ODL teacher or ODL facilitator. So the events of instruction are designed to make it possible for learners to proceed from where they are to the achievement of the capability identified as the target objectives. So all points that just now we have discussed, they point to what? Some people say they point towards a particular theory. Some people say they point towards a particular perspective. Some people say they point towards a particular paradigm. I prefer perspective words over theory and paradigm. So I would like to say, friends, that whatever till now we have discussed, they are just perspectives, not theories. Right? Well, let me start with the behaviorist perspective or behavioristic perspective. What is this? See, the origins of behaviorism can be traced back to the early 20th century. And behaviorism is concerned with, as I said earlier, I would like to repeat, that with observable and measurable behavior. So for behaviorist psychologists, learning is what? Learning is the modification of behavior brought about by experience. Why is it so? Because most of the behavioral psychologists observed the way animals learned and believed that this provided insight into how human beings can learn or how human beings learn. And they try to find rules to explain and predict how learning would occur in every learning situation. And that's why perhaps they explain learning in terms of changes in the subject's behavior. So behavioral change is learning. So the main psychologists who developed the behaviorist approaches to learning were Ivan Pavlov, Edward Thorndike, J.B. Watson, B.F. Skinner. I'll suggest please go through our SLM so that you can have the deeper understanding of their perspectives or their theories and their experimentations. Well, so these behavioral psychologists focused on conducting controlled laboratory experiments and objectively recording observations. Right, friends? So, ultimately, this model of learning developed into a theory of learning which is called behavioristic theory of learning. Now, as far as the theory of behaviorism is concerned, the behavioristic learning theories can be broadly classified into two categories: stimulus-response theories without reinforcement, stimulus-response theories with reinforcement. So, since we are more concerned about the theoretical perspective of behaviorism, so I would like to start with Pavlov's principle of conditioning. So Pavlov has stated a few principles of conditionings. For example, he has talked about principle of reinforcement, principle of sequence and time intervals, principle of stimulus generalization, principle of differentiation, principle of extinction, principles of spontaneous recovery, principle of inhibition, principle of higher order conditioning, principle of secondary reinforcement, principle of age and conditioning. Another psychologist, Watson, explained Pavlov's work in a great detail, and he suggested that human activities could be explained as learned habits. And the work by Watson and Pavlov is called classical conditioning and can be summarized as stimulus response theory. There is another behaviorist psychologist, E.R. Guthrie. He developed his own theory of learning similar to that of Watson. Guthrie suggested that animals learn to associate stimuli and responses merely through their contiguity. And the essence of his theory is that the points that we should remember in our mind is the first, the impact of reward, the function of punishment, the importance of practice. Then, Thorndike was another one, behavioristic thinker and the psychologist who has also given a particular theory. And the essence of his theory is impact, as I said, the last point, that is the implications of Thorndike's theory of connectionism is very, very important, friends. So applying the first law to the educational situations, the ODL specialist or instructional designers should make sure whether the students are ready to receive the knowledge mentally. So how do you start your writing your SLM so that you can mentally bring your reader and the learner mentally active? And for this, the created materials are to be based on learning environment where the students can spontaneously participate. So the distance teacher or instructional designers, or at time and again I have said ODL specialists, should arouse the link between the experiences of students of everyday life with the knowledge to be taught. Similarly, the law of effect can be realized by providing the experiences to the strengths which are satisfying and meaningful in the form of examples in distance learning materials. And they should organize following the principles of simple to complex. The third law, more opportunities should be provided to the students to use and repeat the experiences they undergo while studying the materials. So the drill strengthens the bonds of SR and review of the unit, maintains connections and reinforces learning. There is another very famous psychologist or the behaviorist psychologist, Skinner, who has done the most to develop and apply the ideas originally proposed by Thorndike. And he came out with the concept like operant conditioning, which is comprised of 4 important components such as operant, baseline, unconditional stimulus, shaping, and continued reinforcement. Here I would like to cite one more behaviorist psychologist, Gaine, who involved in the structural analysis of the learning process and the design of instruction. And by devising a systematic approach to instruction, his theories strongly influence the design of many instructional programs. And Gaine's learning theory consists of 5 major categories of human capabilities. Category number 1, verbal information, intellectual skill, cognitive strategies, inductive and deductive reasoning, attitudes, and motor skills. Now, what are the examples of verbal information? If you are helping your students to learn the alphabet, intellectual skills, mathematically addition and subtraction, cognitive strategies, exploring the physical and chemical changes, right? So cognitive strategies, particularly inductive and deductive reasoning, attitudes, how one feels about protecting the environment, motor skills, drawing, typing, driving, etc., etc. Then there are social learning theories. They are also important. And social learning theorists believe in the use of controlled laboratory experiments to find out about learning, but they did not believe that we could find out about human learning from experiments on animals. So social learning theories build upon operant conditioning principles, but concern themselves primarily with the ways in which people acquire behavior appropriate to their social context and their immediate circumstances. So one of the main social theorists is Albert Bandura, who expanded on behavioral principles while acknowledging the importance of cognitive processes such as thinking, memory, and problem solving. And that's why Bandura has stressed the role of internal cognitive structures, which are thoughts or memories of the brain which allow people to learn through observations or imitation of others. Just last day only, I was listening to one of the documentary, and one of the teachers who got the award in a particular nation, and when she was asked, how did you learn to teach? She said, just only by observing my best teachers, how they are good at teaching. So the principles are, these principles of social learning are also applied to not only social learning theory, but also in designing a particular instruction. So much human learning is a function of observing the behaviors of others. So we learn, this is number one principle that we should remember. The second one, we learn to imitate by receiving reinforcement for performing certain behavior and maintain this imitative behavior through continued reinforcement. Friends, I would like to mention here that the imitation or observational learning can be explained in terms of operant conditioning principles, provided it is correct to say that people can imagine both the reinforcement and the behavior of models. And that's why Bandura notes that there are 4 important elements or processes associated with observational learning. And these are the desired behavior, which you can call attention, retaining information or impression, that is a retention, producing the behaviors, motor reproduction, and wanting to repeat these behaviors, intrinsic motivation. Now, very quickly I'll talk about the behaviorist instructional perspective and its application in instructional design. Now, what is the implication for instructional design? The first, friends, for me, assessment of the entry behaviors of the distance learners before designing instructional materials. So you must assess them. Second, statement of learning objectives, which decides what to present and how to assess students' learning. Third, analyze what is involved in the learning task of distance learners. Fourth, develop a sequence of learning tasks that move from the simple to the complex. Fourth, designing assessment strategies to measure students' learning in relation to stated objectives. Next, use guidance, feedback, and reward to reinforce the key points of learning and the process of learning. Similarly, specifically here, I would like to mention the application in instructional design from Gaines' perspective. That is Gaines' theory of condition of learning. The instructional designer must keep in mind some of the following points when developing methods of instruction, and particularly from the perspective of Gaines' work. What are those points? First, skills should be learned one at a time, and each new skill learned should build on previously acquired skills. Second, the analysis phase must identify and describe the prerequisite lower-level skills and knowledge required for an instructional objective. Third, lower-level objectives must be mastered before higher-level ones. Therefore, objectives must be stipulated in concrete behavioral terms. And the next principle is that the positive reinforcement should be used in a repetitive manner. So, to use the principles of operant conditioning, a distance teacher or open and distance learning specialist has to plan instruction in precise steps. What could be those precise steps? The first step may be defining the desired behavior. Second step could be identify the successive steps that are required if the student is to reach this standard. Immediately reinforce approximations to the desired behavior. Communicate your ideas with your students. Change the frequency of your reinforcement as the student's behavior changes, providing reward for achieving desired behavior, friends. Then you can also think of something like specifying behavioral objectives. So from a behaviorist perspective, the planning of instruction will start from an initial statement of the change of behavior. And this change in behavior can take the form of the attainment of new knowledge, the acquisition of new skill, or a change of attitude. So these three types of behaviors are, when you write SLM, you should keep in mind cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. And that's why behavioral objectives are very, very attractive. Almost all educationists love to talk about this and love to write their objectives according to this perspective. So behavioral objectives state what successful learners should be able to demonstrate that they have learned. And each objective should have an outcome that can be easily measured and should state the conditions under which the behavior will be achieved, friends. So there are three rules to follow when specifying an objective in behavioral terms. Let me recall quickly. The first one is the objective has to describe behavior that is observable and measurable or accessible. Second, the objective has to describe the desired direction of the changes in the behavior. Third, the objective should describe the behavior in the context of the content that has to be measured. And then you all know in 1956, Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives came into existence, and Bloom and his colleagues worked very extensively, and we designed, according to Bloom's taxonomy, our educational objectives as well. And even Skinner proposed program instruction, which is a major educational practice based on operant conditions. And time is too short to describe program instruction in detail. I'll request each one of you, please consult our SLM and you will get an in-depth understanding of that. So there are many more things that can be talked about, but I would like to conclude this aspects, that is the behavioral aspects, and I would like to go to another perspective, that is the cognitivist. So I would like to say that with the let me conclude that with the advent of behavioristic approaches to instruction and the later developments in the field, individualized instruction took shape in the classroom. Self-learning materials were prepared which were individual-based. The planning of teaching was preceded by behavioral objectives, sequencing and organizing the instruction, and the behavioristic approach to learning, because it aimed at masterly learning, which includes continuous evaluation of competencies followed by remedial teaching where the students had failed to master the competencies. So educational technologies, computer-assisted instruction were also based on the behavioristic principles, and still they are based, majority of them, that involved drill and practice controlled by the program developer rather than the learner. And self-instructional programs were designed that include pre-test and post-test and the self-directed assessment of the students after completing the course unit. I remember being a student of mathematics, I had developed to teach what is a set only, and I developed that material on the basis of program instruction in 40 pages. So linear, branching, mathematic, all these things. So I'll suggest you, please see our SLM friends. So I stop here. This is the first perspective. The second perspective that I want to continue is the cognitivist perspective, friends. Before that, I conclude here that still what is happening in majority parts of the world and in the discourses of education and in the praxis of education at the school level or the higher level, this perspective is a dominant perspective which is a ruling like any other thing. Thank you.